Thank you for joining us today, Cassie. It is absolutely such an honour to be working with you to bring Mum Bras to Australia, and wonderful to have this connection with you. And yeah, excited to speak with you today about your practice. So you are, of course, joining us today from Texas because Mum Bras here at Bundaberg Regional Galleries is your first Australian exhibition,
And
isn't
in
it?
fact, it is my first solo show.
Oh, really?
Yes,
Wow, first solo show, and it's with
Australia is the best.
we love that. That's so exciting. I didn't realize it was your first solo as well. Oh
First
my God,
solo.
fantastic. So I'm going to start with that question. Your art scene between Australia and your home state of Texas. What sort of no differences, or what do you notice or know about the two different art scenes?
Well, as far as we're considered the deep South, so very conservative in nature. So my work only has a very special pocket of interest
Yep.
in within Texas, which is why I usually ship my work other places. But honestly, the biggest thing I know before anything else with the Australian art scene is my biggest, my most favorite artist on the planet is CJ Hendry. So I don't know if you're familiar with her work.
Yes. Yes.
I think she actually has, she's from Australia. She lives in New York, and I think
Yep.
she was just in Australia for an exhibition.
Yes.
And
I
I'm
think
just
yes.
fangirling her for many, many, many years. And so, yeah, that is the most that I knew about Australian art scene was through CJ Hendry. But honestly, working with you guys the past 2 years has been just so phenomenal. Like I was just telling you a second ago, I've just told all my art friends of how incredible the support that y'all have had towards artists, and then just the communication, and then the team of people that bring the whole vision together has just been really incredible.
Oh, lovely. Thank you for that feedback. It's so
Yeah.
exciting because we don't also, this is our first time bringing it like just like this, like a US based artist specifically to our gallery. Like you said, not part of a group show, but as a solo. So it's been a
Oh,
new
nice.
experience
It's
for
it's
us.
a first for
It is
everyone.
a first, and it's just been such a smooth process. It's been incredible
Oh,
on our end too. So thank you for being wonderful to work with.
well, thank
Um,
you so much for having me.
Oh, we're excited about Mum Bras. So I do, and as we've said, I loved one of the things I really love being director is getting to really get to know the artists and have that relationship with the artists that we show in our gallery. So I've done quite a bit of research because I really wanted to know more about your practice and more about, and you've got such an interesting practice. I saw in a previous interview that you describe yourself as a conceptual performance-based artist who uses fiber as a medium to discuss hard topics. I thought that was a really great description. How does this relate to your arts practice?
Well, if I'm being honest, I grew up in a very, very small farming community and never even had art as a child. And so I really like rocked the boat when I informed my parents that I was going to go to school for art, because I had never had it in school. And so I think my understanding of what traditional art was, I grew up in a very creative home, in a very crafty home. But when I entered the art world, I was just very naive as to what I could make. And
Yeah.
so with that, I fought back for a very long time of being considered a fiber artist. I didn't want to be seen as not serious because I was using fibers. I
Yeah.
was like, and so it really wasn't until becoming a mother that I really didn't care. By baby number 3, I was like, I don't even really care what people think. I need to make this for my own mental health. And it was whenever my very first art piece that I created with fibers with the conceptual background was 1 in 4 I had a miscarriage. And it really was, and that was right before 2020. And
Yeah.
so I've only been doing this work for 5 years. And so it only has been more recently that I've introduced a friend of mine informed me of like, you are doing performance-based work. And I was like, no, no, no. And she was like, you're using your body every time and you record all of these things. And I was like, well, it's documentation. But then it wasn't until maternal imprints. I knitted a shirt that was thermal changing and I documented my children in different stages. And then
Yeah.
I documented the print disappearing as the heat went away. And so it really wasn't until then that I was like blurring. I really recognized of like, oh, I'm doing performance because this is real life, but I'm reenacting I'm performing the real life so I can
Yes.
document it.
It was
And
such a
so
powerful series. It was great.
it,
Yeah,
well,
great.
well, thank
Yeah.
you. And so it really wasn't until then that I was like, okay. And I guess she came unraveled where I knitted a sweater and then had my children literally unravel it from my body. Was kind of like, okay, I'm a performance-based artist as well. But it was never really about the fibers. I was just really conceptually, I had some bigger topics that I wanted to talk about, that I wanted the audiences to be able to talk about. And fibers was just the natural medium for me to. Normally, I say that the fibers, the end result is an artifact. So I feel
Yeah.
like anytime I'm doing performance based work, it's really about the performance, it's about the intimate moment. And then the aftermath, the artifact of the event is my fibers work.
Yeah, it's so amazing. Look, and Cassie, there was another conversation that I read with you, which I think you're talking about with, links into what you've just said, because it was seen that, you tackle some really difficult and often, as you've said, controversial topics through your art. And then there was an interview that I read with you, and then it was described as, because it's fiber art, though, people see that as a soft entry into those conversations. But how do you feel about that, though? Because I wasn't sure how I felt about that description of your work.
Well, I actually kind of love it.
Okay.
I feel like sometimes I'm a self-taught knitter. And so I feel like a lot in the beginning when I was teaching myself to knit, a lot of people were saying, that's a granny medium. What are you doing? Like, why? That's a granny craft. Why are you doing that? But it was even in the craft, it was like relatable. Like they talked about their own heritage in
Yep.
regards to knitting, into fibers. And it was, even before I was making work, it was a conversation with random strangers of them wanting to talk to me about fibers. And so it was an approachable. So I really like that it's an approachable, because before fibers, I was working with wood
Yeah.
and I was doing wood assemblages and these big, humongous sculptures. And I do feel like in some ways it's easier for the goal is to remove the stereotype that it has to be in a gallery to have these conversations. I think
Yeah.
a lot of my work is universal, that we're all having these topics. And if there is an art piece that can start that conversation, that's the goal. I want
Yes.
people to be able to have these conversations. And sometimes it is at the fibers is like an entry point that is a little bit more neutral. Now I know some of my work is not neutral, can come off as really heated, but even in that was very strategic in how I created the work.
Yeah, and I think we're going to chat about that work. I think we're both talking about the same one at the moment, but
Yeah.
I think that I think you said the word approachable, and I think that's it, because even in our gallery space, and we've got mum bras, so effectively we have, this amazing exhibition of women's breasts of all different shapes and sizes, and because it's fiber art, it's on the cover of our, digital program, it's on everything, it's out there, it's on our posters. If that had been a photographic exhibition, how different would the response have been? And yet, because it's
Yeah.
fiber art, Yeah, you're right. There's an approachability. It's like it's taken one step further away from, so people come in and can have that conversation. So I love the approach. I love that word.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
it's fantastic. So the work that we were both just referring to, which is obviously quite a very contentious and difficult work, was of
Mhm.
course your work of school uniform, which is in back brackets bulletproof dress, and you
Yes.
created that work. What year did you create that work?
When did I make it?
Yes.
I made it just a few years ago after a Uvalde school shooting. Just here in Texas, there was a mass massacre in an elementary school, and there was a lot of controversy. I mean, it was right at the end of the year. I have well, yeah, I'm about to have three school age kids in school, but it was just a few weeks before school was let out. And so there was this fear. I live in Texas, it's open carry. You can go to the grocery store and see people carrying guns. It's just casual part of the lifestyle. My husband and I both grew up in farming communities out in the wild. So like it's not it's the conversation about gun safety in our children is why I made the work, because I did have this like fear sending my kids back to the last couple of weeks of school. I
Yeah.
knew statistically they probably would be safe, and they
Yeah.
were,
Yeah.
but like it is way too common here in the United States for gun shooting and violence that happens within schools. It's just it sometimes doesn't even make our news because it's so common. Like it
Yeah.
has to be like four or more like killings before it's like really advertised that this has happened, because it's
Yeah.
just common. And I
Yeah.
was
And
doing
that's
some research in Australia that, I mean, it's been what, since the early 90s since y'all have had any sort of like mass shooting, because I feel like as a country it was y'all took care of the of like, this
yeah.
is a problem, we need to fix it.
Yeah, there was a very swift reaction. That was the Port Arthur massacre, and
Mhm.
absolutely. And I think, and so I think knowing what it is like in Australia, and then obviously, and only seeing, as you said, we only see the tip of the iceberg outside of the US because it's only what those large scale massacres that get reported on.
Yeah.
And then so seeing that image, and I might get you to describe the work for everyone, seeing that image of, it was your daughter photographed in that
Yes,
dress. Yes.
my middle daughter.
Yeah.
So it is a school uniform that was knitted in Kevlar cord. And Kevlar is the most common material used in bulletproof vest and materials.
Yeah.
And so when first looking, especially at the image, and how I've installed the piece. It's currently in the UK in a traveling exhibition, but it's suspended at the exact height that my daughter was at that age that she wore the piece. So it's almost ghost-like when it's installed. But the image of my daughter, I took her to the school and I photographed her in the hallway of the school. And I think the goal, when my first reaction, I'm a very reactionary, very passionate, very emotional person. And so my first thought was like, oh, because my leaders here in Texas, what they were proposing were, let's get bulletproof shields for every single child. We're talking about 5-year-olds. I was like,
Yeah.
keep them in the classroom. And I was like, no. At that time, they had cut mental health. Um, there's a teaching crisis right now because teachers are just not paid. And as an educator, my husband's an educator, like we were like, there is a problem here and we need to be looking at the root instead of throwing more bulletproof everything at these schools. And so in fact they did pass a law. They essentially made it to where every single school in the state of Texas, it's law now, it has to have a police officer on at the school. But in order to do that, in a lot of our areas, they had to cut a lot of the fine arts and the library assistants to help pay for this added security. And I'm not saying that there shouldn't be security. I want schools to be safe for children, but we're not addressing the root of the issue. And so when I first was just really shook by the Uvalde massacre, my first thought was like, I'm going to make this in camo. We are arming our children like they're military officials. And the beauty of knitting is that while I'm like stewing and I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to knit out of this Kevlar, because I broke so many needles knitting that
I
piece.
can't even imagine
And
how you would have knitted with it. It's great. Yeah.
it was so rough and hard. But then the more I thought of it, of like, what is my goal in creating this? Is this to be, I'm outraged over this? Okay, well, who am I going to get to have this conversation with me about this? And it was like, well, anyone that believes what I believe is, if I'm putting an art piece out there that is so controversial and so over the top that we're arming our children in military gear, which we aren't, that would be like not true. But that's how I felt. But I was like, is that going to allow me to have a conversation that I want to have about gun safety here in
Yeah.
Texas? And so I redid it. I was like, but what if I did just a school uniform and it just looks like a school uniform? And it's not until you read what it's made out of that makes you question. Because my sweet little innocent baby that's modeled in the piece, the
Yeah.
interesting for her, I always ask consent anytime that I'm collaborating with my kids. And at the time she was in kindergarten, so she was 5 or
Yeah.
6 at the time. And I said, well, this is made out of the material just so that way that what the cop at your school uses and safety gear and all this other stuff. And she was like, okay. She's like, well, this is what we do. We do lockdown drills once a month. She's like, I have to sit by the toilet while they bang on our doors in case. So I don't know if that's procedural in Australia to do lockdown drills in
Yeah.
case there is a school shooting. They practice it. They practice it in case of an emergency. And so for her, it was like, part of me was like, oh my goodness, this is so normalized for you. You're not even having a scary effect of like, well, this is what we do all the time.
Yeah.
It was just,
Yeah. So, and that would have been really and confronting as a mum too, just for the how, like you just said, how normal that is. And yes, they do practice lockdown drills here, but
okay.
I think, yeah, but probably not to the certainly to the extent of it being monthly and that and for it being so present as it obviously was for your daughter about what that drill was about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
She was
Yeah.
very little and very aware of why she practiced those drills.
Yeah. Yeah. What what was it like for you? Because the image itself is, I mean, you're right. You look at it first and you think, oh, this sweet, little girl in a school uniform. Oh, look how beautiful. And then it hits you what she's wearing, and obviously the history with the massacre and what that had led to you creating that work. And I just imagine as a mom how it would have been, yeah, definitely with the, her understanding of lockdowns, but even just putting her in that and thinking that that could be a reality, really. How
Yes.
how emotionally did you react to that?
It was honestly, when we staged it in the school and I was photographing was like chilling. And I think it was made even more chilling because as soon as I posted it on social media, um, because there was so many parents that were terrified at that time, I really was I thought I was being wise in how I articulated what the work was about, that this is an art piece. But I cannot even tell you how many scared parents contacted me going, will you make one for my child? And I was like, no, that's not what this is
Wow.
for. Like in their minds, how do we mass produce this keep our children safe? And so it was, for me, it was more of that of like, now I'm just picturing lots of little babies in a school uniform, like in a bulletproof
Yeah.
school uniform. And I'm just like, this is not the world that we should be living in, where
Yeah.
we have to be thinking about. And so it was the added layer of parent commentary to me going, how do I buy this? How can I custom design one? And I was just like, this, it's an art piece. I'm glad we're having this conversation, but like this wouldn't even save like it's made of the same Kevlar material purposefully to make a statement, but it wouldn't hold a bullet, like we need to be having a conversation of the root of this issue right here.
Did that artwork do that? You've exhibited that a few times now, haven't you? I know it's as you said in the UK at the moment, but how did it open up those doors for conversation?
It honestly, I saw it as a win when family members who think differently than I do took a pause. They were like, we need to be having a conversation about this. This is like, so I was like, okay, I don't care what anyone else says about this piece. If family members who we argue and fight with during Thanksgiving, if they're sitting there going, I want to have this conversation with you, I thought that was the ultimate test. And so it really did have I had many wonderful conversations. But Yahoo News did an article on the piece. They interviewed me. They did a great job interviewing me, but my husband was like looking, because it was Yahoo News, so people just saw the headline. They didn't really read what the work was about, and it was like pretty horrific, the comments. I refused to look at them because I was like, I'm not going to look at them. But my husband read a few and he was like, these are like threatening. Like it was like threatening. I was like, they clearly did not read what the work was about. But even those, so that's where I ultimately had to walk away with, for the people who, we live in such a fast pace. I mean, we live in Instagram reels that are like 10 seconds of our attention. So, and I'm guilty of it too, just reading a headline and being like, wait, what is that? And then I have to check myself of like, I need to read the whole thing. And so I had decided, especially way before even that piece, of like the people who are genuinely curious and invested in learning more, they read the artist statement. And even if they don't agree, those are the people who I feel like I get to have really good conversations with, who are just like, I want to hear your perspective. It was the family members who were like, wow, well, that makes me think differently about all of my pro-gun thought process. I was like, okay, this is good. This is good.
Yeah. And do you think, because was that the first time that you'd had family rec like that to one of your artworks?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, all of the other, they just think that I'm really weird and they love me for me, but they're just like, Cassie's arts, but that was the first one where family was really wanting, like picking up the phone to call me going, whoa, wow. Like, and I think for them, it was like, that was Louisa. And I thought like, they just saw her as, oh, look at Lou. Why is she on my feet? And it was like, oh my goodness, we need to have a conversation about this topic. And so, but that was probably the first one. A lot of the other ones, I will say, 1 and 4, I had a miscarriage, and I think that is probably on our to discuss here in a second, but it hit home with my dad. And he just passed away a few months ago, mostly because he was there whenever we miscarried. And when I was kind of in shock of like, what do we do? And everyone was like, no, I think everything's fine. Everything's fine. And I just called my dad and was like, I don't think it's fine. It may be, but I'm not being alarmist, but I don't think things are like, I know my body and this is not okay. And he didn't skip a beat. He was like, I'm coming. Me and your mom are coming to watch. My oldest was 2 at the time, and he got here. So I think because he was involved in what that looked like, and me coming home from the hospital to reveal that I had lost the baby, so when the first time that he saw the imagery of the 4 tiny little sweaters, he said, I didn't even need to look at the title. He said, I knew right away what the work was about. And so even before passed away, he would talk about that, of like that it was the most eerie but lovely piece of work that I had made, and like during my time, like while he was alive, it really stuck with him. So that was, I before that we didn't have a lot of conversations about my work at all.
Yeah. And then interesting that that was the work that just really got to him. That
Yeah.
that work. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And because you said that was your first public piece with knitting, wasn't it?
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
and with that piece, and you have described it there because it is four tiny little sweaters, and they're knitted traditionally knitted, aren't they, with little soft
Hmm.
wool and
Yep.
that. And so what was it at that point? I mean, obviously knitting would have lent itself to that particular. What was it at that point that you thought that's how I want to tell this story?
So I was literally weeks away from giving birth to my third born, but I had become the statistic. 1 in 4 pregnancies end in loss.
Yeah,
And so I have been pregnant 4 times, but I only had 3 children here with me. And so the first sweater in that is knitted with linen and stainless steel thread, so it does have a ghost like quality to it.
yeah,
And so I think that it was my I had miscarried 5 years before, and I think it was my, like, once I knew the pregnancy, it was just a few weeks. We have pictures of me literally like having Braxton Hicks contractions photographed in front of the work. And I think it was just closure for me that all of the things that I had heard while I was miscarrying, that was like, this is common, all the things you don't want to hear when
yeah,
you are actively losing a baby, all the things you don't want to hear.
yeah,
But it was like, this is common. This happens all the time. It's like, and so in my brain, I had already had a really healthy, easy pregnancy. And no one told me that was a possibility. No one
yeah,
talked about it. And so it really wasn't until I made that piece. And then I did it for me. And I was
yeah,
shocked at the immediate response of people that I am close friends with. I was like, what? How did I not know that you miscarried? And because there's so much shame that women sometimes feel like they caused it. There's just, there's just a lot of taboo of like, you don't talk about it. Like, or,
mm,
and society's like, oh, well, it was meant to be. Like, there was probably something wrong, So there's like all of this list of things that are said to you that I feel like sometimes as a woman, like you just kind of keep it to yourself. And so my way of processing it, I really wanted, it wasn't initially to make it for other people. Um, but it has been my most shown art piece the past 5 years. It has gone all over the world.
yeah,
But I think it does resonate. Um, but what's interesting, because you had said earlier that I sometimes create controversial topics. And that was one that I didn't think was going to be controversial. But early on, after I had shown it probably in 2021 or 22, I had gotten like accepted into this really huge emerging artists exhibition in London.
mm,
And I was just thrilled. I felt so honored. But even I had a email from the director who sent me, he was like, hey, can you hop onto a Zoom call? We want to talk about the title of your piece. And I was like, okay. And he wanted to remove I had a miscarriage in parentheses. He said, can we
oh,
just call it 1 in 4? And I said, why? And he said, well, I think it might make some people uncomfortable. And I said, okay. And I said, are you, this is personal, but like, do you have a partner? And he was like, yes. And I said, okay. I said, did you come from where did you? And he was like, yes. And I said, so even if you haven't directly experienced a miscarriage, I know that if you walked into an office and just were able to ask people, I guarantee a lot of those women in that room, at your house, your family, have experienced this. And it's important because it's not just affecting women, partners. My husband was affected by the whole experience as well. And so, but we had to rewrite my contract um,
Wow.
because as a young, like, it was risky, but I was very like set that the title needed to stay. I was like, it's,
Yeah.
I'm an educator first. This is educational for
Yeah.
the general public. If people don't see seen, then it's shocking to people that 1 in 4 end in miscarriage. And so we re-signed my contract, that, and I gave him permission that if he got any sort of pushback or complaints from the general public, then he was allowed to remove my work from the exhibition.
Okay.
I
Wow.
signed a new I signed a new contract and not one complaint. He followed up at the end of the exhibition. It was on display for 5 months. He followed up afterwards and he apologized. He said, "I'm really sorry. I just didn't know if it was going to cause like an uproar over it." And
I
so I was
find
like, can you imagine if I would have removed the title? People wouldn't have known what the work was
no,
about.
I find that really interesting, and that whole idea about censorship of works because it may, oh gee, it may be make people uncomfortable, but isn't that the idea about artwork and galleries, is that it's
Yes.
about conversation, and you know, we don't know what is, it's subjective, we don't know what anything could make people uncomfortable, and but it also, it's just really interesting that that sort of censorship that effective would have happened, and he saw that as like a, yeah, as a risk mitigation in a sense.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
just so, and I'm so glad he came back at the end, because I was going to ask you that. I was going to say, did he give you feedback?
Did.
Because
He was
I
a
hope
very
that it was,
lovely person. I think he was just thinking about the gallery space and the who was going to be
yeah,
walking in. So I appreciated that he came back, and even how he approached he was very kind. But ultimately, as a young working artist, I could have been heavily influenced to change the title based on, you know, the higher up. That's like, I am not a rebel in my everyday life, but in my art life, I do hold my ground and I do rebel a little
yeah.
bit.
I like that though. And I think it just, it's that in itself is a really interesting conversation, because, you know, your works do have that sense of, you know, oh gosh, you know, like this could be controversial, or this could raise, you know, questions, or, but I love that you stay committed to it, and if they become conversational. And look, I think
Yes.
that leads us beautifully into mum bras, because, you know, we do have this incredible exhibition of yours in our Gallery 2 space. And I think that in itself, look, once again, you're thinking, gosh, effectively, we're asking people to come in and you know, look at a room of women's breasts,
Yes.
and of all different shapes and sizes, and you know, mastectomies, and yeah, just, you know, everything going on in there, nursing breasts and everything. And so I think I'm interested. So, have you had any controversy over this exhibition?
Um, I think when I first made the very first one in my personal circles, I even, because like I said, I'm first an educator, I sent sketches to my really close friend who is a very incredible artist and educator. But I was like, this is my idea. Will I be able to get a job in the future if I make this work? And he thought it was brilliant. And he was like, Cassie, figure drawing. People have been doing figure drawings forever. You're just sculpting it in a new, different medium.
Yeah.
And so he really encouraged me. He was like, because I was like, I just don't want to not get a job teaching in the future. If I'm, on my resume is that I knitted breasts, And so I think in my immediate circles, other than him and other than my husband, they were kind of like, what? Why are you wanting to do this? And I was like, I was just really upset at the time. The whole reason the Mom Bra started was because I was raised in a very conservative upbringing. And here in Texas, it's just, there is a culture of, it is a no-no to show your body. It is a no-no to, like, there's just like these rules. And while nursing, by the time that I had my third born, I was so tired of sitting in bathrooms. And I
Yeah.
think I had become more comfortable in who I was and as a mother. And in my own body, even though I had changed dramatically. I was more confident in my postpartum body than I was before I became a mom. And so I was like, I'm so sick of making everybody else comfortable while I'm trying to feed my baby. I have two other kids. This is too much. I was like, I want to make a bra that has boobies on it, and I'm going to go in public and make everyone uncomfortable to make them feel the way I feel when I'm trying to nurse my baby in a bathroom.
Yeah.
And so I have yet to wear any of, but that was the original idea, was to wear them as a performance space, to go in public and social experiment to see how others would respond. But I was shocked with I didn't expect the rest of the world to, like, for the mom bras to speak and resonate with people the way that they did. And very quickly after the first one, my inbox just flooded with like, can you knit this? Can you knit this? My body's like this. And the very second one that I knitted was inverted, for an inverted nipple. And so I just started really, I mean, I'm a mom, but I only know my own body. So I immediately started researching what an inverted nipple was. And I was like, oh, well, I gotta make an inverted nipple one. And it just snowballed from there of like, what other bodies can I knit? Like, this is so fun. Like, and so, and you had mentioned the mastectomy one, and I did that one in honor of both of my great grandmothers and grandmothers passed away from breast cancer. So I thought it was really important to really educate, but then it was really became a bigger picture of women, women of color who are, it's disproportionate of not being seen within the medical realm. Just women in general, not like, like not being heard when we talk about our bodies and like what is wrong. And so it was like, there's a whole other conversation that we can have through the mom bra series. I'm just convinced that I'm going to be knitting mom bras until the day I die, just because I feel like as I age, there's always perimenopausals around the corner. And I just know, I can feel it, that there's already a series building and
Mm-hmm.
conversation to start within the Mom Bra series in this next season of life.
I love that. And I believe people actually were contacting you asking you to knit their breasts, weren't they? Yes.
Yes,
So did
yes.
you do life drawing as part of that, or how did that develop?
I did not. I did not. A lot of them, there was a couple of, so at some point, it's on my list to do a pre-vivor. So I learned a lot about women who have a history of breast cancer in their families. They do the genetic testing and reveal that they have the gene that makes them prone. And so instead of saying they are a survivor, they're a pre-vivor, they're actively removing their breast.
Yeah.
Before they even get diagnosed with cancer. So I had many conversations with those women, and a lot of them gave me gave images, and a lot of them that gave me images, like sent me images, were already posting them themselves
Yeah.
on websites. They were already telling their own story. But for me, that is truly, it's important for me that I have not experienced that personally myself, that it's important that I use other voices to really share their story and do it in a respectful way, which is part of the reason why I haven't made that one yet, because I want to make sure that I do it right when that time comes.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you are, I mean, it's sort of like a room of portraits in a sense, isn't it? You know, the mum
Yes.
bras. Yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
Yeah.
What I have to ask, which were the trickiest ones to knit though in the mum bra series?
Probably the latest one, which was the summer bod with the
Yes,
tan lines.
I love
Um,
that piece. And that was knitted specifically for this exhibition in
it
Australia.
was,
Yes.
it was. I thought that might be fun. But I think gearing up, I just there was, with that one in particular, just the nature of the technique. I
Yeah.
had to reknit it 5 times before I got it
Oh,
the way that I wanted. But there was just so much within it. There's just, I think that's the beauty of the Mom Bra series, is that they're humorous. Like, you just look at them and like giggle, like you want to giggle. I mean,
Yeah.
even the most mature, collected person cannot look at the Mom Bras without doing a little giggle, which is great because again, that brings it back to like an invitation to be like, what is this?
They're
And
accessible, like you
so,
said. Yeah.
yes, yes. And so, but with that one in particular, I'm realizing where I'm having to reconcile with my own conservative upbringing of what what women should wear, policing what women should wear, what they shouldn't wear. And I have three daughters of my own, and my oldest is a teenager. And so she is by nature a little bit more, she just wants to be covered. But then we were shopping for swimsuits around spring break, and I was like, do I, where is the line? Is this me of like how I was raised, or should I be more like it? So that Mom Bra in particular was just kind of like, where do we have the conversation, and how do we raise young girls to be
Yeah.
not concerned about what they're wearing, let them wear what they want, but then also having the conversation of not everyone's going to be accepting of what you're wearing, and how to navigate the, beauty standards of today's time of like, how do I get my 12-year-old to not worry about what she looks like on the outside,
Yeah.
when it's everywhere, it's in her face everywhere. And so I feel like, so that Mom Bra in particular was the hardest one to knit, not just because of technique, but just emotionally, it was hitting too close to home for me. I was
Yeah.
like, but I was like, ultimately, it is really funny if people take away of like, everyone wants the tan. These are, the tan lines, the carefree summer. But if you want to have a deeper conversation about it, it's there to have, because it's a lot of feelings that I have around that one in
Absolutely.
particular.
And do you think, Cassie, I mean, motherhood has shaped so much about your art practice in the last few years and the conversations you want to engage in. Do you think now that your daughters are getting older, and as you said, your eldest is a teenager, do you think that that will shape your practice as well? Obviously, that the latest Mum Bra definitely has got you thinking about that. But now, the things you've struggled with as a woman, now you're seeing that your children starting to have those same things. So
Oh, for
yeah,
sure.
how do you see that changing your art practice?
Um, well, it is interesting that the older that my kids get, I mean, when my children were young, the last couple of years, when they were really little, they were very involved in my artist practice. They were very involved, like, but it was through the lens of, it was about my experience as a mother, and they were like assistants. But as they get older, I am finding that there's my oldest is starting to have some of these same conversations that I'm wondering, and whether she chooses to be a mom someday. We're like, if you choose to have children someday.
Yeah.
I can see how that can, like, the conversation of the changing body is already being addressed in our household with my two oldest. And
Yeah.
so I do think that it's going to start a conversation, and going to affect my artist practice as I move from here. I do think that as it gets closer to home, of the same conversations that she's having with me, that I'm experiencing in my own life, I do think that there will be a removal of them actively participating in the performance aspects of the work for their own privacy and for their own, because it will soon be their story if they want it to be told. I can only speak from my story,
Yeah.
but I'm starting to see the correlation of like, oh, this is a conversation you're having with yourself too. Like, I'm just like,
Yeah.
it's interesting. But my whole work, as random as it is, it's just my the way I view the world. So I think that um I think that I will continue to make work about motherhood in whatever stages, just because that's what I know. I will make work about being a woman because it's what I know. And so
Yeah.
I try to stay in my lane of just telling my own story. And if others can relate to it or they can see something that relates to their own life, then I always wanted to be a vessel for them to be able to tell their story, because I
Yeah.
think we're all connected way closer than people like to think we are. Um, but we are all unique. We all have our own unique story that we want. So if ultimately that's the goal. That's the goal, is that everyone can have share a little bit of themselves within the work.
I love that. And I do love that sense, people will come into the space and come into that exhibition and have that story, have that opportunity to, yeah, look and see what it is on the surface, but then take away and actually have a story in the space, have a conversation, discuss it. So what do you hope, particularly with this exhibition here, what do you hope is an outcome of that?
I I really, fingers crossed, that whether they love the work, they think it's just humorous, whether they hate the work, I just hope that there's a conversation afterwards. Like ultimately, even if they are like, I don't like this work, on their drive home from the gallery, it's still a conversation about, I hope that there is a female amongst them that is going, well, this piece looked a
Yeah.
lot like me at this stage of life. And then there's a conversation that's had. Ultimately, the educator in me just wants people to be able to have a conversation so that way we can normalize that we're all unique. Like,
Love
I
it.
just, I hope that somewhat, like, that ultimately I want there to be a conversation.
Yeah, I agree. I feel exactly the same. And that's one of the goals here is always to make spaces that encourage conversation. And I think your exhibition at Mumbra's is going to have that happen in our space. I'm very, very excited to have the public respond to it and hear comments about it, which we will share back with you. Cassie, thank you so much for chatting today and for taking the time to speak so deeply about your practice and share your values about the work that you create. I'm super excited about bringing Mum Bras to our gallery space, and we just wish we could pick you up and bring you over for the opening, but we know that unfortunately can't happen. But we look forward to sharing a lot of fantastic stories about your exhibition here in Bundaberg.
Yes, and thank you so much for having me. It's been such an honor to be a part of this process.
Lovely. Thank you. Thanks,
Thank
Cassie. We'll chat
you.
soon.